Now that the 2018 legislative session has ended, we'd like to give you a quick update on where the VSCPA's issues fell. The VSCPA had a very busy session this year, starting off with tax conformity. As we previously reported, it has been signed by the governor and did include all of the 2017 retroactive changes from both the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and the federal budget legislation passed in February, with the exception of the reduction in the medical expense floor. That remains at 10% for your Virginia return, and there is an add-back process. Changes impacting tax year 2018 and beyond have not been addressed yet. We expect that this will happen as part of a special session later on in 2018. There's also legislation passed requiring that PTINs be included on state tax returns moving forward. This legislation takes effect with the tax year beginning January 1st of 2019. We've also previously reported on data breach legislation requiring that tax preparer data breaches be reported to the Department of Taxation. The VSCPA did work on this legislation to ensure that it wasn't too large in scope and an appropriate reporting requirement that didn't violate any IRS rules. The legislation passed and was signed by the governor and takes effect July 1st of 2018. There were several pieces of legislation introduced this year dealing with tax reform and different ways to tackle that. We saw everything from a tax on professional services to tax on personal services, and also conversation around the idea of allowing taxpayers to select itemized deduction even if they take a standardized deduction on their federal return. All of these measures were continued to 2019 with the idea that they would be talked about as part of the larger tax reform discussion, as well as how Virginia is going to respond to the 2018 tax changes from the federal legislation. Two pieces of legislation were introduced at the request of the VSCPA. The first deals with licensing and will allow the Virginia Board of Accountancy to move license renewals to the same date for all licensees, both firm and individual. Effective on February 26th, when it was signed by the governor, the Virginia Board of Accountancy began this process and is now moving all licenses to a June 30th renewal. The second piece of legislation will simply allow the Board of Accountancy to lower its licensing fees without having to go through the full regulatory process. Speaking of the Board of Accountancy, there were also several pieces of legislation dealing with regulatory reform. The bill that actually passed creates a pilot program to help reduce regulatory requirements for the Department of Criminal Justice Services and the Department of Professional and Occupational Regulation. While this legislation doesn't impact the Board of Accountancy at this point in time, the hope is that if the program is successful, it will be rolled out to all state agencies in the future. The goal is to reduce regulatory requirements by about 25%, and we will be watching it closely. While we're probably all aware that Virginia failed to pass a budget before adjourning for the year and is going to convene a special session specifically to deal with the budget and Medicaid expansion as a big component of that, there was a piece of legislation dealing with healthcare that passed which will positively impact the profession and their clients. This bill changes the definition of small employer to allow sole proprietors and self-employed individuals to participate in the small group market for health insurance. This should significantly lower operating costs for these small businesses and help them out. The final issue the VSCPA was involved with during this past legislative session dealt with spoliation of evidence. While this seems like an unusual issue for the VSCPA to get involved in, we were concerned, along with the broader business community, when attempts were made to revert the bill to its original introduced form. Essentially, this would have allowed a judge to instruct a jury that if records were destroyed, whether intentionally or not, the records would have been detrimental to the party who did the destruction. It's the VSCPA's position that if this kind of significant policy change were to occur, it should be done after study and input from all stakeholders. These were the issues followed by the VSCPA during the legislative session. Keep your eyes open for more information on the upcoming special budget session and potentially a special session on tax reform as well. Thank you again for all you do to support our advocacy efforts.